Dr. Ashford snatched the folder from Sophia's hands, dropped it onto the floor without looking at her, and said, loud enough for the entire hallway to hear, "Stop wasting my time." He grabbed her medical chart, crossed out the last 3 specialist referrals with a single, violent slash of his pen, and snapped, 300 doctors and not one of them found anything because there is nothing to find. You are a hysterical young woman inventing a disease for attention. He said it while her father stood 6 feet away. He said it while her hair was visibly falling onto the examination table beneath her. 300 doctors, 13 months, and the most powerful neurologist in the building just destroyed her last hope with one stroke of a pen. If you have ever been silenced when your life depended on being heard, do not leave. Drop your city in the comments, subscribe, and stay until the end. If you have ever been dismissed when you knew something was deeply wrong, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. And please subscribe because what happens next will change the way you think about who really saves lives. The morning Sophia Winters lost the first clump of hair, she thought it was stress. That was what everyone told her. She was 23 at the time, fresh out of graduate school, working her first real job at an environmental consulting firm in Annapolis, Maryland. She had deadlines. She had a new apartment with a lease that made her stomach hurt every time she thought about it. She had a father who loved her, but who communicated mostly through formal emails and occasional calls that felt more like debriefings than conversations. Stress made sense. Stress was the answer that fit neatly into the life she was trying to build without falling apart. She found the hair in the shower, a palm-sized tangle of dark brown, wrapped around her fingers like something that had given up. She stood there under the hot water for a long moment, staring at it. Then she rinsed it off her hand, told herself it was nothing, and got on with her day. 3 weeks later, she had a bald spot the size of a silver dollar at the base of her skull. Her first doctor was a general practitioner named Dr. In, a kind woman in her 50s who had known Sophia since she was a teenager. Dr. In examined the spot carefully, asked about diet, sleep, stress levels, and blood work. She ordered a full panel and told Sophia to come back in 2 weeks. When the results came back, everything was normal. Iron, thyroid, vitamin D, cortisol, all of it perfectly within range. Dr. In referred her to a dermatologist and told her not to worry. The dermatologist diagnosed her with alopecia areata, which is a condition where the immune system attacks the hair follicles. It sounded logical. It sounded like an answer. Sophia went home and read everything she could find about it, joined an online support group, and started a treatment protocol that included steroid injections directly into her scalp. The injections were painful in a way she had not expected, a deep, spreading ache that lasted for days. But she did them faithfully because she wanted her hair back. She wanted to feel like herself again. The injections did nothing. The bald spot grew. Then a second one appeared, closer to her crown. Then a third, just above her right ear. By the time 6 months had passed, Sophia was buying hats, scarves, and clip-in hairpieces. She was researching wigs. She was waking up at 3 in the morning and lying in the dark, running her fingers across her scalp, counting what was left. But the hair loss was only one piece of it. That was the thing no one seemed to understand. The hair was what people could see, so the hair was what everyone focused on. What they could not see was the headache that lived behind her right eye, like a dull, persistent flame. What they could not see was the way her balance had started to fail her. Subtle at first, a slight stumble on the stairs, a moment of vertigo when she turned her head too fast. What they could not see was the fatigue that had settled into her bones so completely that by 2 in the afternoon, she could barely keep her eyes open, no matter how much coffee she drank, no matter how early she had gone to bed. She told the dermatologist about the headaches. The dermatologist said that was outside her area of expertise and referred her to a neurologist. The neurologist ordered an MRI and found nothing remarkable. He told her the headaches were likely tension-related and recommended she see a therapist. She told the neurologist about the vertigo. He ordered an inner ear evaluation. The audiologist found nothing wrong. He suggested physical therapy for balance issues related to stress. She told the physical therapist about the fatigue. The physical therapist was sympathetic and gave her a sheet of gentle exercises to do at home. He also, gently, suggested she speak to someone about anxiety. Sophia was not an anxious person. She was methodical, careful, thorough. She had gotten through 4 years of university on scholarship, spent 2 summers doing field research in coastal wetlands, and written a thesis that her advisor called one of the sharpest pieces of student work he had seen in a decade. She knew how to assess evidence. She knew the difference between symptoms that were real and symptoms that were imagined. What was happening to her body was real. She just could not get anyone to believe her. Her father found out about the hair loss not because she told him, but because he showed up unannounced at her apartment one Sunday afternoon, something he almost never did. Vice Admiral Marcus Winters was a man who believed in respecting boundaries, in maintaining appropriate emotional distance, in not inserting himself where he had not been invited. But he had seen a photograph Sophia had posted online, a birthday picture with a friend, and even through the careful positioning and the scarf she had draped over her shoulders, he had seen something in her face that troubled him. Not the hair, her eyes, the flatness in them that had not been there before. He stood in her doorway in civilian clothes, holding a bag of groceries he had not needed to bring, and said, "You look tired." It was such an inadequate thing to say that Sophia almost laughed. Instead, she stepped back and let him in. They sat at her kitchen table and she told him everything. Not all at once, not in the organized way she might have presented a report, but haltingly, in pieces. The way you tell someone something when you have been carrying it alone for too long and your arms are finally giving out. The hair, the headaches, the vertigo, the fatigue, the 16 doctors she had already seen, none of whom had given her anything that worked. Marcus Winters listened. He was better at listening than she had always given him credit for, actually. He sat very still, his hands folded on the table, his eyes on her face, and he did not interrupt, did not offer solutions, did not reach for his phone to look something up. He just listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I should have called more." "Dad, that's not—" "I should have called more," he said again, quietly, as if he were issuing an order to himself. "I'm going to help you fix this." Sophia had learned long ago not to put too much weight on her father's promises. Not because he was a dishonest man, because he was a man who was very good at large-scale action and not particularly skilled at the small, consistent, human kind of presence that she had needed from him growing up. But she saw something in his face that afternoon that she had not seen there in a long time. She saw fear, real fear, the kind that belongs to a father, not an officer. She nodded and said, "Okay." Within 2 weeks, Marcus Winters had used every contact, every favor, every thread of professional influence he had accumulated over 30 years of naval service to get Sophia an appointment at one of the most prestigious medical centers on the East Coast. Not just an appointment, a full evaluation, a dedicated team, a case file that was hand-delivered to the department head with a personal note from a sitting congressman who owed Marcus a debt he had never expected to be called in. Sophia arrived at Hargrove Medical Center on a Tuesday morning in October with a folder of records 2 inches thick and a quiet, steely determination to finally get an answer. What she got instead was Dr. Elliot Ashford. Dr. Ashford was 61 years old, the chief of neurology at Hargrove, a man whose name appeared on the covers of 3 textbooks and whose photograph hung in the lobby alongside the other luminaries of the institution. He had the bearing of a man who had been told he was exceptional so many times that he had stopped questioning it, and who now moved through the world with the quiet, absolute confidence of someone who had never seriously been wrong. He reviewed Sophia's file for approximately 8 minutes before her appointment. She would find this out later, from a resident who felt guilty about it. The actual appointment lasted 22 minutes. Dr. Ashford asked her a series of questions in the practiced, efficient way of someone who had already decided on the answer before the patient opened her mouth. He examined her scalp with a detached thoroughness, turning her head from side to side. He reviewed the previous MRI results on his tablet, made a small sound in the back of his throat, and typed something into his computer. "The imaging is clean," he said. "There is no neurological basis for your symptoms as presented." Sophia kept her voice very steady. "But the symptoms are getting worse. The headaches are daily now. My balance is..." "Miss Winters, the human body responds to psychological stress in a variety of ways. Hair loss, fatigue, vestibular disturbances. These are well-documented psychosomatic responses." He looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "I would strongly recommend a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation." "I've already seen a therapist," she said, "for 6 months. She said my mental health is not the source of my physical symptoms." "Therapists are not physicians," he said, in a tone that closed the door on that particular line of conversation. There was a knock at the door, and a nurse entered to let him know his next patient was ready. Dr. Ashford nodded, capped his pen, and stood. "I'll have my team put together a referral for you," he said. "In the meantime, try to reduce your stress levels. Regular sleep, moderate exercise. I think you'll find things improve." He was already moving toward the door when Sophia said, "My hair is falling out in pieces. I can see my skull. I am dizzy every time I stand up. I have a headache that has not stopped for 63 days. Does that sound like something that improves with sleep?" Dr. Ashford paused in the doorway. He turned back, and the look on his face was not unkind, exactly. It was something worse than unkind. It was patient. The look of a man tolerating a difficult child. "Miss Winters," he said, "I have been practicing neurology for 30 years. I understand this is very distressing for you, but I cannot find what isn't there." He left. Sophia sat in that examination room for a long moment by herself. The paper on the table crinkled when she shifted her weight. The fluorescent light above her buzzed faintly. She pressed her fingers against the place on her scalp where the largest bald patch had grown to the size of her palm, and she made herself breathe. Then she gathered her folder and walked out to the hallway, where her father was waiting in one of the plastic chairs against the wall. He looked up when she came out. He read her face in an instant. She watched something tighten in his jaw. "He dismissed it," Marcus said. "It was not a question." "He wants to send me to a psychiatrist," Sophia said. The silence that followed was the particular kind of silence that precedes something significant. Marcus Winters stood up slowly. He was a tall man, and even in civilian clothes there was something about the way he carried himself that made the hallway feel slightly smaller. "Where is he?" Marcus asked. "Dad, I'm not going to do anything inappropriate," he said very calmly. "I am going to have a conversation." What happened next was the kind of scene that gets talked about in hospital break rooms for years. Marcus Winters walked to the nurse's station, asked which direction Dr. Ashford had gone, and was told politely that Dr. Ashford was with another patient. Marcus said equally politely that he would wait. He stood at the end of the hallway with his arms folded and his eyes on the door of the exam room, and he did not move, and he did not sit down, and the expression on his face was one that had, over the course of a long career, persuaded 12 admirals, 4 secretaries of defense, and 1 president of the United States to reconsider their positions. 40 minutes later, Dr. Ashford came out of the exam room and nearly walked into him. To the doctor's credit, he did not flinch. He looked up at Marcus, recognized the controlled fury in his eyes, and said, carefully, "Vice Admiral." "My daughter has been sick for 13 months, Marcus said. "She has seen over 40 physicians. Every test comes back clean, Every doctor sends her to the next one. Meanwhile, she is losing her hair. She cannot stand without getting dizzy, and she has had a headache for 2 months without a single day of relief. He paused. You looked at her file for 8 minutes. You spent 22 minutes with her, and your conclusion is that she needs a psychiatrist. Dr. Ashford straightened slightly. Our imaging shows no neurological cause for... I am not interested in what the imaging doesn't show, Marcus said. I am interested in what you are going to do to find out what it does show. What test are you ordering next? What specialist is she seeing? What is the next step? Vice Admiral, I understand your concern, but I have to practice medicine based on the evidence available to me. Then find more evidence, Marcus said. There was a long pause. I can schedule a follow-up consultation with our full neurology team, Dr. Ashford said finally. In 4 to 6 weeks. You will schedule it in 4 to 6 days, Marcus said, and you will be in that room. It was not a request. Dr. Ashford said he would see what he could arrange. That night, in the parking garage of Hargrove Medical Center, Sophia sat in the passenger seat of her father's car and did not speak for a long time. Marcus drove without pushing her. They were on the highway before she said anything. I'm tired of fighting, she said. Not of being sick, of having to prove that I'm sick. Every single time. Every new doctor, I have to convince them from the beginning that I'm not imagining it. I have to bring my folder and my records and my list of symptoms, and I have to perform being sick in a way that they find credible. And even then, she stopped. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. After a moment, he said, I know. You don't, she said, not harshly, just honestly. You walked in there and said 3 sentences, and he's scheduling a follow-up. I've been saying the same things for 13 months and nobody moved. Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. You're right, he said, and I'm sorry. I should have been doing this from the beginning. Sophia looked out the window at the dark highway. I know you love me, Dad. I just need someone in that building to listen. She did not know, sitting in that car in the dark, that someone in that building already had. Her name was Claire Donovan, and she had been a nurse at Hargrove Medical Center for 11 years. She had been in the hallway when Dr. Ashford walked back to his office. She had been at the nurse's station when Marcus Winters stood there waiting, arms folded, jaw set, something like desperation behind all that military composure. She had handed Sophia a cup of water in the waiting room while she waited for her appointment, and she had noticed, without meaning to, the folder in Sophia's lap, the careful handwriting on the tabs, the way Sophia's fingers moved across the edge of the pages, the way some people touch worry beads. Claire Donovan noticed things. It was not something she had been trained to do, exactly. It was something she had always done, the way some people have a natural gift for numbers or for music. She noticed the way people held their bodies when they were in pain versus when they were afraid. She noticed the small inconsistencies between what patients said and what their records showed. She noticed the details that happened at the edges of the official picture, the ones that the attending physicians were often too busy or too certain to see. She had also been in the hallway outside the exam room when Dr. Ashford told Sophia to go home, and something about it had stayed with her the way certain things do, the way a song lyric gets into your head and will not leave until you figure out why it feels important. That evening, after her shift ended, Claire sat in the break room with a cup of cold coffee and Sophia's case file, which she had no business reading, and read every single page. She read the original presenting complaint. She read the dermatologist's notes. She read the MRI report. She read the blood work panels, all 14 of them, spanning 13 months. She read the notes from the neurologist, the audiologist, the physical therapist, 2 rheumatologists, an endocrinologist, and 3 other neurologists whose opinions had all converged on the same conclusion. Nothing definitive, possible psychosomatic component, psychiatric referral suggested. Claire made notes in the margins of a legal pad she carried everywhere. She circled things. She drew arrows. She went back and forth between the pages the way you do when you are looking for the thread that connects everything. The one detail that changes how you see all the others. It was the physical therapy notes that stopped her. Deep within the documentation, buried in a brief paragraph about Sophia's balance evaluation, the physical therapist had noted that Sophia reported occasional numbness in the back of her scalp, specifically in the area of the largest hair loss patch. The therapist had flagged it as possibly consistent with scalp tension from the alopecia and had recommended gentle massage. Claire stared at that paragraph for a long time. Numbness, not itching, not soreness, numbness, in a localized area at the base of the skull. She thought about the location of the bald patches. She thought about the headaches that had started at the same time as the hair loss. She thought about the vertigo, the fatigue, the way the symptoms had not responded to any treatment. She thought, what would cause all of this, together, in a young, healthy woman, starting in one specific location on the skull? She stayed in that break room until 10:30 at night. Then she drove home, and she kept thinking. The next morning, Claire Donovan came in early. She found the case file again, and she went through it one more time, this time looking for something specific. She found it on page 47. In the original intake form, completed when Sophia first came to Hargrove, there was a standard section on medical history, past surgeries, past hospitalizations, past injuries. Under injuries, in Sophia's own handwriting, there were 3 entries. A broken wrist at age 9 from a fall off a bicycle, a sprained ankle at age 17 from a volleyball game, and a third entry, almost an afterthought, written in smaller letters, as if the person filling out the form had not been sure it was worth mentioning. Head injury, age 7, fell from tree, seen at emergency room, released same day. Claire read it 3 times. Then she set the file down, folded her hands in front of her, and sat very still for a moment the way she did when the pieces of something were just beginning to fit together in a way that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Released, same day. A 7-year-old who had fallen out of a tree struck her head hard enough to go to the emergency room and been released the same day. 17 years ago. Long before CT scans were as routine as they are now for pediatric head injuries. Long before certain kinds of baseline imaging were standard protocol. A child who had fallen from a tree, a young woman whose hair was falling out from the base of her skull, who had headaches that would not stop, who could not keep her balance, whose imaging had all been read by physicians who knew they were looking for standard neurological pathology and found none. Claire picked up the file and went to find Dr. Ashford's chief resident. His name was Dr. Malik, and he was the kind of young physician who still listened because he had not yet been in medicine long enough to believe that he already knew everything. He was 32, and he was tired, and he was on his 3rd cup of coffee at 7:40 in the morning, but he looked up when Claire knocked on his door. "I need 5 minutes," Claire said, "about the Winters case." Dr. Malik looked at her for a moment. "That case has been closed for follow-up." "I know," Claire said. "I need 5 minutes anyway." He gave her the 5 minutes. She gave him 12, because that was how long it took her to lay out what she had found and what she suspected. She did it clearly, methodically, the way she had rehearsed it in her car on the drive-in. The childhood head injury, the numbness in the scalp, the location of the hair loss, the vertigo, the headaches, the fatigue, all of them consistent with a particular kind of chronic intracranial pressure issue that could be caused by an old, untreated fracture that had never fully healed. Dr. Malik listened. He leaned forward slightly about 3 minutes in. He picked up the file and found the page she was describing. He read the entry about the childhood injury. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The MRI was clean. Standard MRI protocol would not necessarily catch a chronic stress fracture at the skull base if it's subtle and well compensated," Claire said. "What she needs is a high-resolution CT with specific attention to the occipital and parietal regions, and a consultation with someone who specializes in post-traumatic craniofacial reconstruction. Dr. Malik looked at her. He was not dismissive, but he was cautious, in the way of someone who understood what it meant to challenge the conclusion of the chief of neurology. Dr. Ashford reviewed this personally, he said. I know, Claire said. He is going to say, I know what he's going to say, Claire said. I'm asking you what you think. There was a pause. I think, Dr. Malik said slowly, that it is worth a second look. Claire nodded. That's all I'm asking. She walked out of his office and back to the floor, and she did her job, and she took care of her patients, and she did not hear anything for the rest of the day. She went home that night and she sat with her cat in her quiet apartment, and she told herself that she had done what she could do, and the rest was out of her hands. But she did not sleep, because somewhere across the city, Sophia Winters was lying in her own apartment with a headache that had not stopped in 63 days, and a patch of scalp that grew wider every morning, and a folder full of records that ended with the word psychiatrist. And Claire Donovan could not shake the feeling, the deep, bone-level certainty that there was something in that skull that no one had found yet, and she was not going to let it stay hidden, not if she had anything to say about it. Dr. Malik did not sleep either. He sat at his desk long after Claire had left his office, turning the file over in his hands the way you turn a problem over in your mind when you know the answer should be there, but you cannot quite reach it yet. He was young enough to still feel the weight of a patient he could not help. He was young enough that the face of a sick person still stayed with him when he went home. He read the intake form again. Head injury, age 7, fell from tree, seen at emergency room, released same day. He read it 3 times, the same way Claire had. Then he set the file on his desk, stared at the ceiling for a moment, and made a decision that he knew might cost him something. He pulled up the internal scheduling system and entered a request for a high-resolution CT scan with specific cranial-based protocol. He listed Sophia Winters as the patient. He listed himself as the ordering physician. He did not call Dr. Ashford first. He told himself he would explain it in the morning. The request went in at 11:47 at night. By 7:15 the next morning, Dr. Ashford had already seen it. He was standing in the hallway outside Dr. Malik's office when Malik arrived, and the expression on his face was the particular kind of controlled fury that very powerful men deploy when they want you to understand the full weight of their displeasure without giving you anything specific enough to formally object to. He did not raise his voice. Men like Ashford never needed to raise their voice. Dr. Malik, he said, my office, now. Malik followed him. He sat across from Ashford's desk and kept his hands still in his lap, which took more effort than it should have. You ordered a diagnostic scan on a patient whose case I personally closed, Ashford said, without consulting me, without flagging it through proper channels. Can you explain to me what you were thinking? I found something in her file that I think warrants a second look, Malik said. What you found, Ashford said, is a standard intake notation about a minor pediatric head injury that occurred 17 years ago and was evaluated and cleared at the time of the incident. What you are suggesting is that my evaluation of this patient was incomplete. Is that what you are suggesting, Dr. Malik? There was a long pause. I'm suggesting that the childhood injury may not have been as minor as the original ER notes indicated, Malik said carefully, and that a high-resolution CT with occipital protocol would either confirm that or rule it out definitively. The MRI was clean, Ashford said. A standard MRI protocol would not necessarily show a chronic stress fracture at the skull base, Malik said, and he heard his own voice come out steadier than he expected, especially if it's subtle and the surrounding tissue has compensated over years. Ashford looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that takes full inventory of a person. Who put this idea in your head? He said. It was not a question. It was a door being opened, and on the other side of that door was an invitation to name someone else and spread the weight of this conversation more thinly. Malik felt it clearly. He also felt clearly that walking through that door was exactly the wrong thing to do. "I reviewed the file on my own time," Malik said. "The notation stood out to me." Ashford's jaw moved slightly. "Cancel the scan order," he said. "If you want to order additional diagnostics on a patient, you come to me first. That is how this department functions. That is not a suggestion." Malik nodded once. He stood up. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the handle. And then he stopped. He was not entirely sure, later, why he stopped. He would think about it many times in the years that followed, that particular moment in that doorway, his hand on the handle, the specific quality of the silence behind him. He would think about what it costs to keep walking through a door when you know what you are leaving behind on the other side. He turned around. "With respect, sir," he said, "I don't think I can do that." Ashford went very still. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't think I can cancel the order," Malik said. "This patient has been symptomatic for 13 months. She has seen over 40 physicians. Nobody has given her an answer. I found a detail in her file that might explain her entire presentation, and I ordered a non-invasive diagnostic scan to investigate it. If I'm wrong, the scan will show nothing, and we've lost an hour of imaging time. If I'm right, and I cancel the order because it was inconvenient and something serious is missed," he stopped. "I can't do that. I'm sorry." The silence in Ashford's office was absolute. "You are a second-year resident," Ashford said very quietly. "In this department, at this institution." "Yes," Malik said, "I am." He walked out. His hands were shaking by the time he reached the elevator. Claire was at the nurse's station when Malik came down the hall. She looked up at his face and read it in an instant, the way she read most things, and she felt her stomach drop. "He told you to cancel it," she said. "Yes," Malik said. "Did you?" Malik looked at her. "No." Claire exhaled. It was not quite relief, because relief implies that the danger has passed, and the danger had not passed. But it was something. It was enough. "He's going to go after you," she said. "Probably," Malik said. "Is the scan scheduled?" "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., Claire said. "I already called Sophia Winters to confirm." Malik looked at her for a moment. "You called her before you knew whether I'd cancel the order?" "I called her," Claire said simply, "because someone needed to." Sophia arrived at Hargrove the next morning in the same careful, prepared way she had been arriving at every medical appointment for 13 months. Folder, records, list of symptoms updated through the previous night. She had not slept well. The headache was there when she woke up, the way it was always there now, a permanent resident behind her right eye that she had stopped expecting to leave. Her father drove her. He sat in the waiting area and did not pace, because Marcus Winters did not pace. He sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the door that Sophia had gone through. And he looked, Claire thought, watching him from across the room, like a man who had learned how to be very still under conditions that would make most people run. The scan took 40 minutes. Claire stayed close to the imaging suite. She was not technically assigned to that floor that morning, and she knew it, and she went anyway, because there are moments in your professional life when following protocol means being in the wrong place, and she had learned, the hard way, to trust the instinct that told her which place was wrong. She was in the corridor outside the radiology reading room when the technician came out, and she saw on the technician's face the particular expression that radiologists and their staff wear when they have found something they were not expecting. It is not horror exactly. It is a very specific kind of alertness. The look of someone who has been following a trail and has suddenly come out into a clearing they did not know was there. "Is Dr. Malik available?" the technician asked. Claire pulled out her phone. Malik was there in 4 minutes. He went into the reading room, and Claire stayed in the corridor and waited. She waited for what felt like a very long time. She had been waiting, in various forms, for most of her professional life, and she had gotten good at it. But this particular waiting was different. It was the waiting of someone who has placed a bet on something that matters more than they can easily explain. The door opened. Malik came out, and his face had that same cleared expression that she had seen on the technician, that same quality of having arrived somewhere unexpected. "There is a fracture," he said, "incomplete, chronic, at the occipital base. It's subtle. It would be easy to miss on standard imaging, but it's there." Claire put one hand flat against the wall behind her and breathed. "How bad?" she said. "Bad enough," Malik said. "There's associated pressure on the surrounding tissue that's consistent with everything she's reported. The headaches, the vertigo, the hair loss in that specific location, all of it, it fits." He paused. "Claire, it fits perfectly." She nodded. She did not say, "I told you so," because that was never the point. She said, "What do we do now?" "I have to take this to Ashford," Malik said. "He's going to hate this," Claire said. "Yes," Malik said, "he is." He went to find Ashford. He found him in a consultation room at the end of the hall, reviewing notes for a morning meeting, and he knocked on the open door and said, "Sir, I need you to look at something." Ashford looked up. His expression when he saw Malik in his doorway was not warm. "Dr. Malik," he said, "I thought I was clear." "The scan found something," Malik said. "I need you to look at the imaging." There was a pause. Something moved across Ashford's face, just briefly, something that might have been uncertainty if it had belonged to a different man. "Bring it up," he said. Malik pulled up the imaging on the room's display screen. He walked Ashford through the findings the same way Claire had walked him through them, clearly, without editorializing, letting the images speak. The fracture line at the occipital base, the tissue pressure, the precise location that corresponded to every major symptom Sophia had been reporting for over a year. Ashford stood in front of the screen with his arms folded and his eyes moving across the images with the practiced attention of someone who has spent 30 years reading exactly this kind of picture. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally spoke, what he said was, "The original ER never imaged the base." "No," Malik said. "They did a standard skull series. The fracture is in a region that would have been easy to miss with 2007 imaging protocols on a pediatric patient." Another long silence. "This has been there for 17 years, Ashford said. "It appears so," Malik said, "undetected, slowly causing pressure changes as the surrounding bone and tissue continue to develop around an incomplete healing site. The hair loss is almost certainly neurogenic alopecia caused by local nerve compression at the occipital base. The headaches and vertigo are from the pressure. Everything she's been experiencing is physically rooted. It was never psychosomatic." He said the last sentence carefully, not accusingly, just factually, the way you state a finding. Ashford was quiet for a very long time. "Get me the full imaging series," he said finally, "and get neurosurgery on the phone. I want Dr. Petrova in here today." He paused. "And get the patient back in," he said. His voice had changed. Something in it had shifted. Some quality of absolute certainty that had been its permanent texture. It was not quite humility, but it was the closest thing to it that his voice knew how to produce. What happened next moved fast in the particular way that medicine moves fast when a serious finding demands action. Dr. Irina Petrova, the head of neurosurgery at Hargrove, reviewed the imaging within 2 hours and confirmed Malik's interpretation. She was a compact, direct woman in her 50s who had the habit of speaking in short, complete sentences and the reputation of being someone who did not cushion difficult information in unnecessary packaging. She looked at the scans for 11 minutes. Then she said, "This is operable. It's been there long enough that the surrounding structure has adapted, which is actually to our advantage surgically. The risk profile is manageable. This patient needs a cranioplasty to correct the occipital defect and relieve the associated pressure. "What's the recovery outlook?" Malik asked. "If we do this right," Petrova said, "and there is no reason to believe we will not, she should see significant improvement in her neurological symptoms within weeks of surgery. The hair loss will likely reverse as the nerve compression is resolved." She paused. "Who's been managing her case?" "Dr. Ashford," Malik said. Petrova glanced at him. Something passed between them that did not need to be said out loud. "Get the family in," she said. Sophia and her father were brought into a consultation room at 2:30 that afternoon. Claire was there because Malik had quietly made sure she was assigned to the case. She stood near the door, not at the table, in the way that nurses often occupy rooms, present but not centered, necessary but uncredited. She watched Sophia's face as Dr. Petrova walked them through the findings. Sophia listened with the focused stillness of someone who has been waiting for this moment for so long that she does not trust it yet. She asked 2 questions, both of them precise and intelligent, about the surgical approach and the recovery timeline. She did not cry. She held herself together with both hands, metaphorically speaking, the way she had been holding herself together for 13 months. It was her father who came apart, just slightly, just at the edges. Marcus Winters listened to Dr. Petrova describe the fracture at the base of his daughter's skull, the one that had been there since she was 7 years old, since the afternoon she had fallen from the oak tree in the backyard of the house where he had been away at sea. The afternoon his then-wife had taken Sophia to the ER and been told she was fine and brought her home. And Marcus had come back 3 weeks later to a daughter with a bandage on her head in a story he had heard secondhand and filed away and never thought about again. He listened to all of it, and his face stayed composed, and his voice stayed level, and only Claire, watching from near the door, saw his right hand close around the edge of the table with a grip that turned his knuckles white. When Dr. Petrova finished, Marcus said, "Can this be fixed?" "Yes," Petrova said, "we can fix this." Marcus nodded once. He looked at his daughter. Sophia was looking at him. There was something in her face that was not anger and not grief exactly, but something that contained both of those things and something else underneath them. Something that looked, Claire thought, like relief. Not relief that it was fixable, relief that it was real. That after 13 months of being told she was imagining it, of being sent to psychiatrists and given pamphlets about stress management and having her folder handed back to her with nothing new written in it, someone had finally found what was actually wrong. "It was real," Sophia said, quietly, not to anyone in particular. "It was always real," Dr. Petrova said, with the directness that was her defining quality. "We should have found it sooner." The room was very quiet. Then Sophia looked across at Claire, who was standing near the door in the way that people who are not supposed to be at the center of things always stand, and she said, "Who ordered the scan?" Malik glanced at Claire. Claire did not move. "I did," Malik said, "with important assistance from your nursing team." Sophia held Claire's eyes for a moment. Claire gave a small nod, just barely. Sophia nodded back. Ashford arrived late to the consultation. He entered the room after Petrova had finished her explanation, after the surgery date had been tentatively set, after the room had already processed the weight of what had just been found. He sat down at the table and folded his hands and said, to Sophia, in the measured tone of a man choosing his words with extreme care, "I want to acknowledge that my initial assessment did not account for all the relevant factors in your case. I'm glad that a more complete picture has now emerged." Sophia looked at him. She was very still. "You told me I was hysterical," she said. Ashford held her gaze. "My choice of language in our initial consultation was not appropriate, and my conclusion was not supported by a thorough enough review of your history. You crossed out my referrals," she said, "in front of my father. I understand that my conduct in that appointment fell short of the standard of care this institution upholds." I want to hear you say it was wrong, Sophia said. Her voice was not loud. It was quiet and absolutely level. The voice of a woman who has run out of patience for carefully constructed non-apologies. Not that your language was inappropriate, not that your conclusion wasn't supported. I want to hear you say that you were wrong about me. The silence that followed was one of those silences that fills a room completely, that leaves no space for anything that isn't completely honest. I was wrong about you, Dr. Ashford said. It cost him something. Everyone in the room could see that. Whether it was enough to matter was a question that would take longer than this afternoon to answer. Marcus Winters looked at Ashford for a long moment after he said it. Then he looked away, back at his daughter, and something shifted in his face. Some decision made or something released. He reached across the table and put his hand over Sophia's. She turned her palm up and held it. Claire watched from near the door. She was thinking about the break room 2 nights ago, the cold coffee and the legal pad and the page 47 with a small, handwritten notation. Head injury, age 7, fell from tree. She was thinking about how close it had come to going the other way. If she had gone home instead of staying, if Malik had canceled the order, if Sophia had given up, which would have been completely understandable, after 13 months and over 300 doctors, and a chief of neurology who had crossed out her referrals with a violent slash of his pen. None of those things had happened. She looked at Sophia, who was still holding her father's hand, and she thought about what it means to be heard. Not agreed with, not validated with a form or a referral. Actually heard by someone who is paying close enough attention to notice the small thing that everyone else missed, who is willing to stay late and read 47 pages and fight a small, quiet, professional battle on behalf of someone they barely know. She thought about all the patients she had seen in 11 years who had not had that, who had gone home with the folder and the psychiatrist referral and the pamphlet about stress, and who had kept getting sicker in their kitchens, in their bedrooms, in their cars, without anyone reading page 47. She thought, this is not enough. Not the finding of it. That was enough for Sophia. That was everything for Sophia. But the fact that it had come this close to not happening, the fact that it required a nurse staying late on her own time and a resident risking his entire position to defy his department chief. The fact that the mechanism by which this had finally been found was fragile and individual and deeply dependent on who happened to be in the hallway at the right moment. That was not enough, not even close. She did not say any of this out loud. She stood near the door, and she watched Sophia hold her father's hand, and she filed it away in the part of herself where she kept the things that needed to be changed. She had one more fight to start, but that one could wait until after Sophia was safe. For now, the surgery was scheduled. The fracture had a name. The pain had a source. And for the first time in 13 months, Sophia Winters went home that night without having to prove to anyone that she was sick. She already knew what she had always known. And now, finally, so did they. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday. That gave Sophia 6 days. 6 days to sit with the knowledge that there was something inside her skull that had been there since she was 7 years old. Something that had been quietly shaping the course of her pain for 17 years without anyone knowing its name. She had expected to feel relief once they found it, and she did feel relief, in flashes, in the moments when she let herself think about what life might look like on the other side of this. But underneath the relief, there was something else, something that did not have a clean name, something that felt like grief and rage, braided together so tightly that she could not pull one loose without the other coming with it. She had been sick for 13 months, but the injury had been there for 17 years. She had been 7 years old when she fell from that tree. She had not even understood what an ER was. She had cried because her head hurt and because she was scared, and a nurse had put a sticker on her hand, and a doctor had looked at some pictures and told her mom she was fine, and they had gone home and had soup for dinner, and she had fallen asleep on the couch watching cartoons. And her father had come home 3 weeks later and nobody had thought to mention it in any meaningful way, because everyone had already been told she was fine, and fine was the story they had all agreed to believe. Fine, for 17 years, while the fracture sat at the base of her skull like a slow leak in a foundation, invisible, undetected, doing its quiet damage. She called her mother on the second night. Her parents had been divorced since Sophia was 12, and her mother lived in Portland now, remarried, with a step-family that Sophia liked well enough, but had never quite let herself attach to. Her mother's name was Linda, and she was a warm, somewhat scattered woman who felt things very deeply and expressed them very loudly. And Sophia had spent most of her adult life managing the emotional gap between her mother's way of being in the world and her own. She told Linda about the fracture. She told it calmly, matter-of-factly, the way she told most difficult things. There was a silence on the phone that lasted about 4 seconds, and then Linda said, "Oh God, oh Sophia." And then she was crying, and Sophia found herself, as she often did in conversations with her mother, in the position of being the steadier person. "It's okay, Mom," she said. "They can fix it." "But I took you to the ER," Linda said. "I was there. They said you were fine. They said you were absolutely fine, and I believed them. I believed them, and you've been sick all this time because I—" "Mom," Sophia said, "stop. I should have pushed harder. I should have demanded more tests. I should have—" "Mom," Sophia said again, "you believe the doctors. That is what you are supposed to do. That is what everyone is supposed to do." There was a shaking breath on the other end of the line. "I'm flying out," Linda said. "You don't have to." "I am flying out," Linda said, in a voice that did not leave room for discussion. "I will be there for the surgery. Do not argue with me about this, Sophia Marie, because I am not going to win this one, and we both know it." Sophia almost smiled. "Okay," she said. "Come." She hung up and sat in the quiet of her apartment and thought about being 7 years old and having soup and falling asleep on the couch and nobody knowing. She thought about all the years between then and now. The headaches she had written off as tension headaches throughout high school. The brief, weird episodes of dizziness in college that she had attributed to not eating enough, to studying too hard, to being 20 and overextended. The way her hair had started thinning so gradually in her early 20s that she had not even noticed until it was already too late to call it subtle. All of it, every single piece of it, pointing back to one afternoon, one fall, one fracture that was supposed to be nothing. She pressed her fingers against the back of her skull, gently, the way she had done 1,000 times, and this time she knew what she was feeling for. She did not know if she could feel it, but she pressed her fingers there and she thought about it. And she thought about Claire Donovan staying late in a break room, reading page 47 of her file. And she thought about Dr. Malik standing in a doorway with his hand on the handle and turning around anyway. She thought, people did that for me. And then she thought, how many people are there who nobody does that for? She did not have an answer, but the question did not leave her. On the morning of the third day before surgery, Hargrove Medical Center received a formal complaint. It had been filed with the hospital's patient advocacy office, and it named Dr. Elliot Ashford by name, and it detailed the specific events of Sophia Winters' initial consultation with specificity and documentation that made it immediately clear that this was not a complaint filed in the heat of emotion, but one compiled with deliberate, methodical care. The complaint cited the manner in which Dr. Ashford had dismissed Sophia's symptoms, the language he had used, the crossing out of referrals, the 13 months of inadequate care that had culminated in a chief of neurology telling a patient with an undetected skull fracture to see a psychiatrist. The complaint was filed by Marcus Winters. He had been working on it, quietly, since the afternoon of the consultation room, while everyone else in that room had been focused on the surgery and the recovery and the relief of finally having an answer. Marcus had sat at Sophia's kitchen table that evening with a yellow legal pad and written out everything he could remember, date by date, doctor by doctor, statement by statement, with the same methodical, exhaustive precision that had made him effective at his job for 30 years. He had called 2 attorneys. He had spoken to a patient rights advocate he had been connected to through a colleague. He had done all of it without telling Sophia because he knew she would tell him to wait, to focus on the surgery first, to let it go. He was not interested in letting it go. He was not doing it for himself. He was not doing it for the satisfaction of watching Ashford answer for what he had said. He was doing it because Sophia had said, in the dark of his car on the highway, "I've been saying the same things for 13 months and nobody moved." And he had been the person who moved it, not because he was right and she was right, but because of who he was, because of the stars on his uniform, because of the congressman's note, because of 30 years of institutional power that Sophia, as a 24-year-old woman with a folder and a list of symptoms, simply did not have. That was the thing that kept him up at night, that specific inequality, not just what had happened to his daughter, but what it meant that it took him to fix it. If he had not shown up, if he had not stood in that hallway with his arms folded, if he had not made 4 phone calls and called in 1 favor, where would Sophia be right now? He already knew the answer. She would be at home with a psychiatrist's number and a pamphlet about stress reduction and a patch of scalp growing wider every morning. And she would have kept fighting because she was his daughter and she did not know how to stop, but she would have been fighting alone. He filed the complaint, and then he went to the hospital that morning and sat with his daughter and did not mention it. Claire found out about the complaint the same way most people at Hargrove found out about things that were not supposed to be general knowledge. From the break room, from the particular quality of silence that falls over a nursing station when something significant is moving through the administrative floors above them. One of the unit coordinators told her in a low voice near the coffee machine, a formal complaint, patient advocacy, Ashford. Claire took her coffee and went back to her patients and did her job. She felt the information settle into her chest the way significant things do, not with surprise exactly, but with a kind of recognition. Of course he filed it. Marcus Winters was a man who believed in accountability the way he believed in everything, absolutely and without apology. Of course he had not let it rest at a half apology in a consultation room. What she did not expect was to be called into the patient advocacy office that same afternoon. The woman who ran the office was named Sandra Obi, and she was the kind of administrator who gave you the impression of someone who has seen a very great deal and is no longer capable of being surprised by any of it, but remains, somehow, genuinely committed to doing the right thing. She was in her late 40s, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. She asked Claire to sit down and told her, without preamble, that the complaint filed by Vice Admiral Winters referenced the nursing staff in the neurology unit in a way that made her involvement in the case relevant to the review. He says in the complaint, Sandra said, looking at her notes, that a member of the nursing staff identified the critical detail that led to the correct diagnosis. He wants that person identified and recognized formally. Claire looked at her hands on the table. Dr. Malik ordered the scan, she said. Dr. Malik has already spoken to us, Sandra said. He was clear about the sequence of events. He reviewed the file at the suggestion of a nurse who had noticed the childhood injury notation and connected it to the patient's current symptom profile. She looked up at Claire over her reading glasses. Was that you? Claire was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. Sandra made a note. You stayed after your shift to review the file. Yes. You were not assigned to the Winters case at that time. No. And you brought your findings to Dr. Malik the following morning. Yes. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. And when Dr. Ashford instructed Dr. Malik to cancel the scan order, you were aware of that? Claire met her eyes. I was aware. And you called the patient to confirm the scan appointment Before you knew whether Dr. Malik would cancel the order or not, Sandra said. It was not a question. Yes, Claire said. Sandra set her pen down. She took her glasses off the chain and put them on and looked at her notes for a moment, and then she looked back at Claire. I need to ask you something directly, she said. Did you believe when you made that call that you might be creating a problem for yourself professionally? Claire thought about it. Not because she did not know the answer, but because the question deserved an honest answer and not a reflexive one. Yes, she said. I knew it was possible. But you called her anyway. I called her anyway, Claire said, because if nobody called her and the order got canceled and she went home and got worse, and it turned out I had been right about what was in that file, she stopped. I couldn't live with that, she said simply. I just could not. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Thank you for your time, Nurse Donovan. You'll be hearing from us. Claire stood up. She walked to the door. Before she reached it, Sandra said, For what it's worth, and Claire stopped. The scan result confirmed everything you suspected. I know, Claire said. You saved that young woman's life, Sandra said. Claire thought about Sophia in the intake waiting room, turning the pages of her folder with the careful precision of someone who has been dismissed so many times that she has learned to prepare for it like armor. She thought about page 47. She thought about the small handwriting, the entry that might as well have been invisible for all the attention it had received. Someone needed to read the file, Claire said. That's all. She walked out. The complaint moved fast once it moved. These things either die quietly in administrative offices or they develop momentum. And the Winters complaint developed momentum in the particular way that complaints develop momentum when they are filed by someone with 30 years of institutional authority and documented with the precision of a military after-action report. By the end of the week, the hospital's medical ethics board had opened a formal review of Dr. Ashford's handling of the case. By the following Monday, 2 other former patients had come forward with accounts of similar dismissals. Not physical injury, but the same pattern, the same crossed-out referrals, the same language about psychiatric components, the same absolute certainty deployed in place of due diligence. Dr. Ashford was placed on administrative review pending the investigation. He was not fired. That would take longer and might not happen at all, and that was the difficult reality of institutions, that accountability moves through them slowly and partially and often stops well short of where justice would put it. But he was off active patient care while the review was conducted. His name was removed from the new patient assignment roster. The resident he had been mentoring was quietly reassigned to another attending. The department had a meeting. Claire was not in that meeting. Nurses were not in that meeting. But Dr. Malik was, and he told her about it afterward, standing in the corridor outside the break room with his coffee going cold in his hand. Ashford sat there the whole time like he was attending a seminar on someone else's problems, Malik said. Every question the board asked, he had an answer. Every documented instance they brought up, he had a framing for it. He never once said he had been wrong about a patient. He said his methodology had been sound based on the available evidence, and that the additional imaging had been an appropriate next step that he would have ordered himself. He would have ordered it himself, Claire said flatly. That is what he said, Malik said, after you defied him directly to keep the order in place. Yes, Claire looked at him. How are you doing? Malik turned his coffee cup in his hands. He was quiet for a moment. 2 of the ethics board members pulled me aside after, he said, separately. Neither of them said anything specific, but both of them shook my hand. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Good, she said. He nodded. Then he said quietly, I keep thinking about how close it was. If you hadn't come to me that morning, if I just followed the protocol and canceled the order, if the technician had been less thorough, if the fracture had been even slightly less visible on the imaging, if Petrova had read it differently. But none of those things happened, Claire said. But they could have, Malik said. That's what stays with me. All the ways it could have gone differently, and every one of them ends with her going home with nothing. Claire did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That's why it has to change." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The way this hospital hears nurses," Claire said. "The way any hospital hears nurses. This should not have required me staying late on my own time and you risking your residency. There should be a formal mechanism, a channel where a nurse can flag a concern about a patient's care and have it reviewed by someone with authority, without having to go through the attending whose judgment they're questioning." She paused. "This happens all the time. Not the fracture, the dismissal. Nurses see things every day that get ignored because we are not the ones with the authority to act on them. And patients pay for that with their health and sometimes with their lives." Malik was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something that looked like the specific recognition of someone hearing an idea that they know is right. "You'd have to go to administration with that," he said. "Formally, a proposal." "I know," Claire said. "Ashford still has allies in this building," he said. "People who think the review is an overreach. People who are not going to be receptive to a nurse standing up in front of the department and telling them their hierarchy is broken." "I know that too," Claire said. "You've already put yourself out there professionally with this case," he said. "If you push further, it gets harder to protect you if things go sideways." Claire looked at him steadily. "Dr. Malik," she said, "how many patients do you think have come through this department in the last 10 years with something that a nurse noticed and nobody acted on?" He did not answer. Because there was no answer, that was not a verdict. "I'm going to administration," Claire said. "You don't have to be involved." "I'll be involved," he said immediately, without hesitation. "Tell me what you need." The surgery was on Thursday at 7 in the morning. Dr. Petrova led the team. The procedure was called a posterior fossa cranioplasty, which meant that they were working at the base of the skull, in the region where the fracture had been living quietly for 17 years. And they were going to correct the structural defect that had been causing pressure on the surrounding neural tissue for the entirety of Sophia's adult life. It was intricate work in a sensitive location, and it would take between 3 and 4 hours. And the risk of complications was real but manageable, according to Petrova, who said the words "real but manageable" with the kind of flat honesty that Sophia had come to appreciate in her enormously. Sophia went into pre-op at 6:15. Her father was there, and her mother, who had flown in from Portland 2 days earlier and had been staying at a hotel 3 blocks from Sophia's apartment. And the two of them sat on opposite sides of Sophia's gurney in that particular, careful proximity of two people who have been divorced for 12 years and are united now by something larger than whatever had divided them. Linda held Sophia's hand. Marcus sat on the other side with his forearms on his knees, leaning forward, in the posture of a man who is doing everything in his power to be physically close in a situation where physical closeness is the only thing he has left to offer. The pre-op nurse came in to go over the checklist. She was young, mid-20s, and she moved with the efficient kindness of someone who does this every day and has not yet lost the ability to make each patient feel like the only one. She checked Sophia's wristband, asked her to confirm her name and date of birth, reviewed the surgical consent form. Then she looked up from the clipboard and said, "Is there anything you need before they take you back?" Sophia thought about it for a moment. "Is Nurse Donovan working today?" The nurse checked something on her tablet. "She is. She's on the neurology floor." "Can you tell her," Sophia started, and then stopped, because she was trying to find words for something that did not fit neatly into the kind of sentence you say to a pre-op nurse to pass on to someone else. She tried again. "Can you tell her that I know what she did and that I'm going to be okay?" The nurse looked at her for a moment with an expression that contained something genuine. "I'll tell her," she said. The gurney moved at 6:53. Sophia watched the ceiling pass above her, the fluorescent panels going by in their evenly spaced rhythm, and she thought about being 7 years old and having soup after the ER and falling asleep on the couch, and she thought about being 24 and sitting in 43 different examination rooms and being handed back the same folder every time. And she thought about Claire Donovan at a table in a break room with a cold cup of coffee and a legal pad in 47 pages. She thought, one person paying attention. That was the whole thing. One person who looked at the detail everyone else had walked past and did not walk past it, who stayed when she could have gone home, who made the call before she knew whether it would matter. One person. The doors to the OR swung open, and the light was very bright, and Dr. Petrova's voice was clear and calm, and Sophia let herself be moved into position, and she looked up at the ceiling one more time, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that when this was over, when she was on the other side of this, she was going to make sure that more people had what she had. Someone paying attention. The anesthesia came quietly. Sophia closed her eyes, and the work of saving her, finally, completely, began. Marcus Winters knew the exact duration because he had been watching the clock on the wall of the surgical waiting room from the moment the doors closed behind Sophia's gurney, and he had not looked away from it for any meaningful length of time in the hours that followed. Linda sat beside him for the first hour, then got up to get coffee, then came back, then got up again to call her husband in Portland, then came back again. She moved the way people move when they are too frightened to sit still, but have nowhere to go. Marcus sat completely still. He had spent a career in situations where the outcome was uncertain, and all you could do was wait for the information to come to you, and he had learned, a long time ago, that stillness preserved the thing you needed most in those moments, which was the ability to think clearly when the information finally arrived. He did not feel clear. He felt like a man who had been hollowed out and filled back up with something that burned. But he sat still, and he watched the clock, and he did not let the burning show on his face. Linda came back with 2 coffees at 8:45 and set one in front of him. He picked it up without looking at her. "She's going to be fine," Linda said. It was the 4th or 5th time she had said it since they arrived. "I know," Marcus said. "Petrova said the risk profile was manageable," Linda said. "I know," Marcus said again. "Marcus." Linda's voice had shifted, slightly. He looked at her. Her eyes were red at the edges, not from crying right now, but from earlier, from the last 2 days, from the accumulated weight of finding out that the afternoon at the ER 17 years ago had been the beginning of something nobody had caught. "I need to say something." "You don't need to." "I need to," she said. "I was the one who took her to the ER. I was the one who brought her home when they said she was fine. If I had pushed harder, if I had asked more questions, if I had—" "Linda," Marcus said, quietly but with enough weight behind it to stop her. "The doctors told you she was fine. You believe them because that is what you are supposed to do. That is not on you." "Then why does it feel like it is?" Linda said. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "Because you love her," he said, "and that means you'll spend the rest of your life looking for what you could have done differently. I know because I'm doing the same thing. I should have been there that day. I should have been around enough to know about it, to follow up, to ask questions. I wasn't. I was at sea and then I came home and she had a bandage on her head and I let it go." He paused. "We both let it go, because 2 people we trusted told us to." Linda was quiet. She picked up her coffee and held it in both hands. "The difference between you and me," Marcus said, "is that I have spent 30 years making decisions where people follow me because of my rank and not because I've given them a reason. And I never once thought about what that costs someone who doesn't have that rank. Until now." He looked at his coffee. She was right, what she said in the car, about the 3 sentences. Linda looked at him. He had not told her about the car, but Linda was a woman who understood subtext, and she followed the thread. "She forgives you," Linda said. "You know that." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm working on forgiving myself." The doors opened at 10:42. "Doctor." Petrova came out still in her surgical cap, which she was pulling off as she walked, and her face was composed in the way that surgeons' faces are composed when the outcome is what they intended, which is a very specific kind of composed that is not quite neutral and not quite relieved, but somewhere precisely between them. She walked to where Marcus and Linda had both risen to their feet, and she said, without preamble, because that was who she was, "It went well. We fully corrected the structural defect. The pressure on the surrounding tissue has been relieved. She is in recovery, and she is awake, and she is asking for both of you." Linda made a sound that was not quite a word. Marcus said, "Thank you," in a voice that he had to work to keep level. Petrova gave him a single nod. Then she said, "She is a remarkably strong young woman. What she has tolerated, physically and otherwise, for the past 13 months would have broken most people. The fact that she kept pushing for an answer, that she did not accept the dismissals and go home and stop fighting." Petrova paused, and for the first time in all of Marcus's interactions with her, something in her face shifted slightly away from clinical and towards something more personal. "That matters. It's part of why she's going to recover fully." "How long for recovery?" Marcus asked. 4 to 6 weeks for the surgical site. The neurological symptoms should begin improving within days. The hair regrowth will take longer, a few months, but the nerve compression is resolved, so it will come. Petrova looked at him steadily. "She's going to get her life back, Vice Admiral. All of it." Marcus sat back down after Petrova left. He sat because his legs had done something unexpected. Some release of the tension he had been holding in them for 3 hours and 47 minutes. And sitting seemed like the right response. Linda sat beside him and put her hand over his, the same way Sophia had done with him in the consultation room. And he led her, and they sat together in the surgical waiting room for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have been through something difficult and come out the other side still standing. Sophia was in the recovery room when they brought her parents back. She was pale and her voice was slightly blurred at the edges from the anesthesia, but her eyes were clear and focused, and she looked at her father when he came through the door with an expression that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Not the expression of a daughter relieved to see her father, the expression of a woman who had spent a year fighting to be believed and had won, and who was now allowing herself, for the first time, to feel the full weight of what that victory had cost her to achieve. "Hey," she said. "Hey," Marcus said. He pulled a chair to the side of her bed and sat, and he reached out and put his hand over hers, very gently because of the IV line, and she turned her palm up and held it, the same way she had in the consultation room. "The headache," Sophia said. She said it slowly, the way you say something you are still processing. "It's gone. I woke up and it was just..." She stopped. "It's been there every day for 2 months, and I woke up and it was gone." Marcus tightened his hand over hers. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. Linda came around the other side and took Sophia's other hand, and the three of them were quiet for a moment in the recovery room with the monitors making their soft sounds, and nobody needed to say anything more than what had already been said. Claire was at the nurse's station on the neurology floor at 11:15 when her phone buzzed with a text from the pre-op nurse she had spoken to briefly that morning, a woman named Jess, who had the kind of institutional memory that made her know everyone in the building worth knowing. The text said, "Surgery went well. Patient is in recovery. She said to tell you she knows what you did, and that she's going to be okay." Claire read it twice. She set her phone face down on the desk. She looked at the wall across from her for a moment. Then she picked up a patient chart and went back to work, because there were 6 other patients on her floor who needed her. And the fact that Sophia was okay did not make any of them less important. But she carried it with her for the rest of the day. That small sentence, "She's going to be okay." She carried it the way you carry something that has cost you something, carefully, in a pocket close to where it matters. The formal review of Dr. Ashford's conduct concluded 3 weeks after the surgery. The Medical Ethics Board at Hargrove issued its findings in a 12-page report that was distributed to department heads, the hospital's board of directors, and the state medical licensing authority. Claire got a summary of it from Sandra Obi, who called her into the patient advocacy office one afternoon and read her the relevant conclusions with the careful precision of someone who understands that the people most affected by an institutional document deserve to hear it clearly. The board found that Dr. Ashford had demonstrated a pattern of premature diagnostic closure in complex cases. It found that his dismissal of Sophia Winters had been inappropriate both clinically and in terms of professional conduct. It found that the language he had used in the initial consultation had been demeaning and inconsistent with the hospital's standards for patient interaction. It recommended mandatory retraining in diagnostic methodology, a supervised return-to-practice protocol, and a formal apology to the patient. What it doesn't recommend, Sandra said, setting the document down, is the removal of his privileges. Claire looked at her. He keeps his license. He keeps his license, Sandra confirmed. The licensing authority could still act independently, but based on this review alone, he is eligible to return to supervised practice after completing the retraining program. Claire was quiet for a moment. How many patients has he dismissed over 30 years? She said, not a question, a statement that asked to be acknowledged. That, Sandra said, is the question the board is now asking. 2 other patients came forward during the review. There may be more. There are more, Claire said. Probably, Sandra said. She looked at Claire over her glasses. Which is why what you are proposing matters, not just for this hospital. Claire had submitted her proposal to the administration 10 days after the surgery. She had worked on it for 4 nights, sitting at her kitchen table with her legal pad and her laptop, building the case the same way she had built the case in her own mind, piece by piece, evidence by evidence, until it was something that could not be easily dismissed. The proposal was for a formal nursing clinical insight protocol, a structured mechanism by which nursing staff could raise clinical concerns about a patient's care directly to a designated patient safety officer, bypassing the standard chain of command that ran through the attending physician when the concern was about that physician's judgment. The protocol would require the concern to be reviewed within 24 hours by a senior clinician with no current involvement in the case. It would protect the nurse who raised the concern from retaliation, and it would create a documented record that could be reviewed if a patient's condition deteriorated. It was, in the language of hospital administration, a significant structural change. It was, in the language of what had actually happened to Sophia Winters, the minimum that common sense required. The administration had sat on it for 10 days without responding. This was not unusual. Institutions sit on things. They form committees. They consult legal. They weigh the political cost of change against the political cost of inaction. And they move at a pace that is calibrated to protect the institution and not the individual. Claire had expected this. She had not expected what happened next. Marcus Winters requested a meeting with the hospital's board of directors. He did not go through the patient advocacy office. He went directly through a contact on the board who owed him nothing professionally, but who had received a letter, personally written by hand on Marcus Winters' personal stationery, that outlined in 4 careful paragraphs what had happened to his daughter and what a nurse at this institution had done to save her life, and what he believed that nurse deserved in return. The contact brought the letter to the board chair. The board chair called a special session. Claire found out about the meeting the morning it was scheduled. She found out from Malik, who had heard from the charge nurse, who had heard from the unit coordinator, who had heard it the way things get heard at Hargrove, through the specific resonance that important information creates as it moves through a building full of people who care what happens in it. They're meeting today, Malik told her, about the protocol. I know, Claire said. Winters is presenting, Malik said. Claire looked at him. He doesn't have to do that. He wants to, Malik said. He called me last night. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak as well. I said yes. Claire felt something shift in her chest. You didn't have to. You said the same thing to me, Malik said. And I told you then what I'm telling you now. Tell me what you need. The meeting was at 2 o'clock. Claire was not in the room. The board had not invited the nursing staff, which was its own comment on the institution's current relationship with the people who delivered its patient care. But Sandra Obi was in the room, and Sandra had agreed to speak directly to Claire's proposal. And Marcus Winters was in the room, and Dr. Malik was in the room, and that was enough for Claire to feel, as she went about her afternoon rounds, that the things she had been trying to do for the past 3 weeks had at least found the room it needed to be heard in. She found out how it had gone at 4:30 when Malik appeared at the nurse's station with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the careful steadiness he usually wore, something more open than that, something almost surprised. They approved it, he said. Claire set down the chart she was holding. They approved the full protocol, she said. With modifications, Malik said. They want a pilot program in 3 departments for 90 days before full implementation. They want the patient safety officer role to be a physician-nurse co-lead rather than a standalone position. But the core of it, the protection for nursing staff, the 24-hour review requirement, the bypass mechanism for attending physician review, all of it is in. He paused. They also voted to issue a formal commendation in your name. It'll go in your permanent record and be read at the next department-wide meeting. Claire looked at the wall across from her for a moment. How did Winters do? She said. Malik's expression shifted. He walked in there and he stood at the head of that table, and he said, without notes, without anything written down, that his daughter had been dismissed by a physician in this building because she was a young woman without institutional power, and that she had been saved by a nurse who had institutional knowledge and institutional experience and absolutely no institutional authority to act on what she knew. He said that the gap between those two things, knowledge without authority, is where patients fall through and where some of them do not come back up. And then he said that he had spent 30 years in a system built on hierarchy and chain of command, and he believed in hierarchy when it was built on merit and accountability, and he did not believe this hospital's current structure met that standard. Malik paused, and then he sat down, and nobody said anything for about 15 seconds. Claire was quiet. He said one more thing, Malik said. At the end, after the vote, he looked at her. He said he wanted it on record that the reason his daughter was alive was a nurse named Claire Donovan who stayed late and read a file and made a call before she knew if it would matter. And he said he thought the institution should ask itself how many Claire Donovans it had and whether it was treating them accordingly. The words landed in Claire's chest and stayed there. She thought about 11 years of standing near doors in consultation rooms. 11 years of noticing things from the edges of the official picture. 11 years of writing notes in the margins of her own understanding because the margins were the only place she had been given. She thought about Sophia at 7 years old, falling from a tree. She thought about page 47. She thought about all the pages 47 in all the files, in all the departments, in all the hospitals in this country, sitting unread in folders that nobody with authority had time to open. I need to call someone, she said. Malik looked at her. Who? A journalist, Claire said. A friend of mine from college. She covers healthcare policy. She picked up her phone. If this protocol is going to mean something beyond this building, people need to know why it exists, what it was built from, what it almost didn't happen. That will put your name out there, Malik said, publicly. I know, Claire said. Ashford still has people here who... I know, Claire said again, the same way she had said it before, with the steadiness of someone who has already done the calculation and accepted the answer. She looked at him. You told me once that it gets harder to protect me if things go sideways. I did, Malik said. I'm not asking to be protected, Claire said. I'm asking to be heard. There's a difference. She made the call. The story ran 12 days later in a healthcare policy publication that had a significant readership among hospital administrators, medical ethicists, and patient advocacy organizations nationwide. It was not a sensational story. It was a careful, well-reported account of what had happened to Sophia Winters, what had allowed it to happen, and what one nurse and one resident had done about it. It named Claire by name with her permission. It named the protocol. It named the gaps in institutional structure that had made the protocol necessary. It named Dr. Ashford. By the end of the week, the piece had been shared widely enough that 2 other hospital systems in the region had reached out to Hargrove requesting information about the protocol design. A patient advocacy organization in Washington, D.C. called Sandra Obi's office to ask if Claire would be willing to speak at a national conference on patient safety in the spring. Claire was at work when Sandra called her with that last piece of information. She was in the middle of a medication check, and she finished the medication check, and she documented everything correctly, and she told Sandra she would think about it, and she hung up. Then she stood in the corridor for a moment and allowed herself, just briefly, to feel the full size of what had started with a cold cup of coffee in 47 pages. She thought about something Sophia had said in the recovery room, which Malik had relayed to her later. Sophia had said, "I kept thinking on the way into surgery that when I was on the other side of this, I was going to make sure more people had what I had. Someone paying attention." Claire had been paying attention for 11 years. She had been paying attention in hallways and break rooms and at the edges of consultation rooms where she was present but not centered. She had been paying attention when it was inconvenient and when it was professionally risky and when nobody asked her to and when nobody thanked her for it. She was still paying attention now. Only now, for the first time in 11 years, the institution she worked for was starting to build something that would make her attention count. It was not enough, not yet. She knew that clearly. One protocol in one hospital, built on one case, was not a revolution. There were thousands of hospitals in this country, thousands of Claire Donovans standing near doors in consultation rooms, thousands of patients in folders on desks, thousands of page 47s that nobody had read yet. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, Claire had learned, are built out of exactly this. One detail noticed, one call made, one person who turns around in the doorway, one person who refuses to let it go. The conference was in Washington, D.C. on a Friday in late March, 6 weeks after Sophia's surgery. Claire had said yes to Sandra's offer on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in the corridor of the neurology floor with her phone in one hand and a medication chart in the other. And she had spent the following 3 weeks quietly preparing for it the same way she prepared for everything that mattered. Methodically, privately, at her kitchen table at night, building her thoughts into something that could stand on its own in a room full of people who had the authority she had spent 11 years without. She had never spoken at a conference before. She had been to one, years ago, a regional nursing symposium in Baltimore, where she had sat in the back row and listened and taken notes and gone home feeling that the people at the front of those rooms were a different category of person than she was. People with publications, people with credentials after their names that filled entire lines, people who had been handed a microphone because the institution had decided they deserved one. She was not that kind of person. She had never been that kind of person. But Sophia Winters was walking without vertigo for the first time in over a year. And somewhere in this country, right now, there was another patient in another folder on another desk, and a nurse in a hallway who had noticed something and no mechanism in place to make that noticing count. Claire packed a single bag and drove to D.C. on Thursday night. The National Patient Safety Summit drew about 400 attendees. Hospital administrators, department heads, patient advocacy directors, a scattering of physicians, a smaller scattering of nurses, 2 healthcare journalists whose press badges Claire recognized from the piece that had run after the protocol was approved. The kind of room that makes decisions that filter down, slowly, unevenly, incompletely, into the places where the actual work of medicine gets done. Claire was scheduled to speak at 10:15 on Friday morning, in the second session of the day, which was titled Structural Barriers to Frontline Clinical Voice. She sat through the first session on her own in the third row, listening to a hospital administrator from Ohio talk about quality improvement metrics. And she turned her notes over in her hands and thought about what she was going to say. And she thought about Malik telling her, "You have to go to administration with that." And she had said, "I know." And she thought about Sophia's face in the recovery room when she said the headache is gone. And she thought about page 47, and by the time the moderator called her name, she had stopped thinking and started just knowing, which was the only state from which she had ever been able to do anything that mattered. She walked to the front of the room. She did not use the presentation slides she had prepared. She had prepared them carefully, 14 slides with data and citations, and a structural diagram of the protocol. And she stood at the podium and looked at the room, and she pushed the clicker aside, and she just talked. She talked about Sophia, not by name, not yet, because she had not been given permission to use the name in this room, but by the shape of the story, the shape that everyone in medicine recognizes if they have been paying any attention at all. A young woman with escalating symptoms, a trail of referrals that led nowhere, a folder that got thicker while the patient got sicker, a chief of neurology who had spent 8 minutes with the file and 22 minutes with the patient, and 30 years being certain. She talked about the break room and the cold coffee and the legal pad. She talked about page 47. She talked about what it had cost Dr. Malik to keep the scan order in place and what it had cost her to call a patient before she knew whether the order would be kept. And she said plainly, in a room of 400 people, that neither of those things should have required personal courage. Both of them should have been possible through a formal channel that protected the people who used it. And neither of them was, because no such channel existed. She talked about what happens when it doesn't exist, not in the abstract, not in the language of quality metrics and adverse event statistics, but in the specific. The patient who goes home, the folder that gets filed, the nurse who noticed something and was told, directly or indirectly, that noticing was not her role. The physician who was never wrong because the mechanism that might have demonstrated otherwise was never built. She talked about the protocol, what it required, what it protected, what it had already changed in 3 months of pilot operation at Hargrove, which included 4 separate nursing-flagged clinical concerns that had led to 2 revised diagnoses, 1 medication error caught before administration, and 1 patient transferred to a higher level of care 48 hours earlier than would otherwise have happened. 4 concerns, 2 revised diagnoses, 1 medication error, 1 earlier transfer, in 3 months, in 3 departments. She let those numbers sit in the room for a moment. Then she said, "I have been a nurse for 11 years. In 11 years, I have stood near the door in more consultation rooms than I can count. I have noticed things. I have written those things in the margins of my own understanding because the margins were the only place I had been given. I have gone home some nights knowing that a patient was not getting the full picture of care they deserved and that I had no formal path to change that without risking everything I had built professionally." She paused. "I got lucky with Sophia. I had a resident who listened. I had a father who had the institutional power to force a hearing. I had an imaging result that was definitive enough to be undeniable. Take away any one of those factors, and we are having a very different conversation about what happened to that young woman." She paused again. "Most of the time, we do not get that lucky. Most of the time, we just get the outcome." The room was very quiet. "This protocol is not a complicated piece of technology," she said. "It is not expensive to build. It does not require a massive restructuring of clinical hierarchy. It requires an institution to make one decision, which is to formally acknowledge that the people who spend the most time with patients are a clinical resource and not a support function. That what they notice has diagnostic value. That their voice, when a patient is at risk, deserves a formal path to be heard. She looked out at the room. That is all it requires. And in exchange, it catches what the hierarchy misses. It catches page 47. She walked back to her seat. The applause started before she had fully sat down. What happened in the following 6 weeks was the kind of thing that Claire had not allowed herself to anticipate, because anticipating it would have felt too much like assuming it. And she had learned, in 11 years, not to assume that the right thing would happen simply because it was right. 7 hospital systems contacted Hargrove, requesting the protocol documentation within 2 weeks of the conference. A patient safety nonprofit in Boston reached out about adapting it for a national pilot program. A state legislator in Maryland, whose constituent had died from a misdiagnosis 2 years earlier, called Sandra Obi's office and asked whether the protocol's creator would be willing to consult on a proposed patient safety bill. Claire said yes to all of it. She said yes in the same quiet, methodical way she did everything, one thing at a time, on her own schedule, around her shifts at Hargrove, at her kitchen table at night. She had not quit her job. She had not been offered a position that would take her away from the floor. She was still a nurse at Hargrove Medical Center, still assigned to the neurology unit, still at the nurses' station at 7 in the morning, and still reading patient charts at 11 at night when the floor went quiet. The work outside the hospital was happening in parallel, not instead. She was not going to stop being a nurse, because being a nurse was why any of the rest of it meant anything. Malik noticed. He brought it up one morning in the corridor outside the break room, which had become, over the past 3 months, the unofficial location of most of their significant conversations. "You're doing all of this and still working full shifts," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "When do you sleep?" "Enough," she said. He looked at her with the expression he wore when he was trying to figure out whether pushing further would be welcome or not. "The charge nurse position is opening up in this unit in July," he said carefully. "Williams is moving to nights. The posting goes up next week." Claire looked at him. "Are you telling me to apply?" "I'm telling you the posting goes up next week," he said. "What you do with that information is your business." She thought about it for 3 days. Not whether she wanted it, which was not the question, but whether it would make her more effective or less effective. Whether the additional administrative responsibility would expand what she could do or contract it. Whether stepping out of direct patient care, even partially, would cost her something that she was not yet willing to give up. On the 4th day, she went to the charge nurse's office and asked for the application. She was the only internal candidate. She was offered the position on a Wednesday afternoon in May, in a conversation that lasted 6 minutes and felt much longer than that, and she accepted it in the same way she had accepted every significant thing in the past year, without fanfare, without performance, with the quiet certainty of someone who knows that the next step is the right one and does not need an audience to take it. She called Malik from the parking garage after. "I got it," she said. "Of course you did," he said. "Dinner. Tonight. You pick." She picked a diner 2 blocks from the hospital that neither of them had ever been to, but that Claire had driven past 100 times and always meant to try. They sat in a booth in the back and they talked for 3 hours. Not about the protocol or the conference or the charge position, but about the things that people talk about when they have been through something significant together and are finally on the other side of it and can breathe. His family in Michigan, her apartment and the cat she had adopted 3 years ago and named after a character in a novel she could not remember the title of. How he had almost quit medicine in his 2nd year of residency. How she had almost left Hargrove twice in 11 years and had stayed both times for reasons she was only now beginning to understand fully. "Why did you stay?" he asked, the 2nd time he met. There was a context to the question that they both understood. Claire thought about it. "There was a patient," she said. "An older woman, early-stage Parkinson's, not yet fully diagnosed. She had been in the unit for a workup, and nobody on the team had put the full picture together yet. I was doing her morning vitals, and I noticed the way her hand rested on the rail when she was trying to hold herself steady. This specific resting tremor that I had seen once before in another patient years earlier. I flagged it to the attending. He ordered the right test. She got her diagnosis 4 months earlier than she would have otherwise. She paused. She sent me a card at Christmas, handwritten. She said that 4 months had let her start treatment early enough to stay independent for longer than the doctors had expected. She said those months were her granddaughter's first steps and her son's wedding and a trip to see the Grand Canyon that she had been planning for 40 years. Claire looked at her coffee. 4 months. From one morning. From one noticing. She paused. I stayed because I understood, then, that the work is not small. The work is enormous. We just make it invisible. Malik was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You should tell that story at the next conference." "I should write it down first," Claire said. "Do both," he said. The twist that Claire had not anticipated, the one that arrived not with drama, but with the particular quiet weight of something that has been approaching for a while and finally reaches you, came on a Tuesday in early June. She was at her desk in the charge nurse office, which still felt slightly unfamiliar in the way of spaces you have earned and not yet fully inhabited, when Sandra Obi appeared in the doorway. "Do you have 5 minutes?" Sandra said. Claire looked at her face and put her pen down. "Sit down," Claire said. Sandra sat. She had a folder with her, which she set on the desk but did not open immediately. She looked at Claire with the expression of someone who is deciding on the order of information. "The licensing authority completed its independent review of Dr. Ashford," Sandra said. "The one that ran in parallel with the ethics board review." "I know about it," Claire said. "They've been running it for 2 months." "They issued their findings this morning," Sandra said. She opened the folder. "They found a pattern of conduct spanning 11 years. 14 former patients whose cases met the criteria of premature diagnostic closure, resulting in documented patient harm. 3 of those cases involved diagnoses that were delayed by more than 2 years. One of those patients died," she paused, "from a condition that was treatable, had it been identified when a nurse on his unit first flagged it." Claire's breath stopped for a second. "A nurse flagged it," she said. "Flagged it to him directly," Sandra said. "He dismissed it. The flag was documented in the nursing notes. The licensing authority found the nursing notes in the file." She looked at Claire steadily. "The patient's name was Robert Callahan. He was 62 years old. He died 19 months after Ashford dismissed a nurse's concern about an irregular finding during a routine admission." The room was very quiet. "Ashford knew about the nursing notes," Claire said, not a question. "He knew about them," Sandra said. "He noted in his own documentation that the nursing observation had been considered and found inconsistent with the clinical picture." Claire put both hands flat on the desk. "The licensing authority," Sandra said, "has suspended his license pending a formal disciplinary hearing. The suspension is immediate and indefinite." She paused. "He will not be seeing patients." Claire did not say anything for a long moment. She thought about Robert Callahan, who was 62 years old and whose name she had not known this morning, and whose death had been documented in a file that a nurse had written something important in, something that had been read and dismissed and left there for 19 months while he got sicker. She thought about that nurse, whoever she was, wherever she was now, whether she knew that what she had written had finally been found, whether she had ever stopped thinking about Robert Callahan. She thought about the difference between that case and Sophia's. One nurse flagged it informally and was dismissed by the physician. Another nurse flagged it informally and found a resident who listened. One patient died. One patient woke up from surgery and said the headache is gone. The difference between those 2 outcomes was not the quality of the nursing observation. It was what happened to the observation after it was made. That was the whole thing. That had always been the whole thing. What happens to the protocol, Claire said, when the licensing authority's findings go public? Sandra looked at her. What do you mean? People are going to hear about Ashford and about the nursing notes in the Callahan case, Claire said. The question they are going to ask is why there was no formal mechanism for that nurse to escalate what she saw. And the answer is going to be that there wasn't one. And the next question is going to be whether there is one now. She paused. We need to be ready to answer that. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, What do you need? I need a press statement from the hospital that explicitly connects the Callahan case findings to the development of the protocol, Claire said. Not defensively, directly. We built this because this gap existed. We know it cost a life. We are telling you that so you know we know it. And so you know that we built something to close it. She paused. And I need the protocol documentation ready to share with any institution that asks for it in the next 72 hours, because they will ask. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. You've already thought this through, she said. I've been thinking it through for 6 months, Claire said. The Callahan findings went public on Thursday. By Friday morning, Claire had received 43 emails. By the following Monday, the number was over 200. Hospital administrators, patient advocates, nurses from institutions in 22 states, 3 healthcare journalists, a congressional staffer, and 1 email from a woman named Patricia Callahan, who was Robert Callahan's daughter, and who wrote, in 4 short paragraphs, that she had read about the protocol and about what Claire had done, and that she wanted Claire to know that her father had been a quiet, gentle man who had spent 40 years as a high school history teacher, and who had loved bird watching and bad puns, and who had deserved better than what he got. And that if what Claire was building could prevent another family from sitting with what her family had sat with, then she wanted Claire to know that she was grateful, and that she was cheering for her, and that she thought her father would have been too. Claire read that email 4 times. Then she wrote back, carefully, taking her time with every sentence, because Patricia Callahan deserved every word of it. Sophia came back to Hargrove 6 weeks after surgery, not as a patient, but as a visitor. She came on a Tuesday afternoon, and she wore her hair down, which she had not been able to do in over a year. The hair that was growing back steadily now, not fully there yet, but coming, the same way the rest of her was coming back, incrementally, unmistakably, in the particular way that health returns to a body that has been allowed to heal what was actually wrong with it. She asked at the front desk for Claire Donovan. Claire came down from the neurology floor and found her standing in the main lobby, and the first thing she noticed was the hair, and the second thing she noticed was Sophia's posture, which was different from the posture of the woman who had sat in the waiting room with the folder in her lap, turning the edges of the pages. That woman had been braced. This woman was standing straight. You look good, Claire said. I feel good, Sophia said. That still surprises me every morning. I wake up and there's no headache and I think, oh, right, this is what it's supposed to feel like. They found a quiet corner of the lobby and sat, and Sophia talked and Claire listened, the way Claire had always listened, with her full attention, without filling the silences. Sophia told her about the recovery, about the first week, which had been hard in the specific way that surgical recovery is hard, the pain manageable but present, the fatigue real, the moments of doubt that are natural when you are lying in a bed trying to trust that the thing that was supposed to fix you has actually fixed you. About the second week, when the headache did not come back, not even a shadow of it, and she had lain in her bed and cried for about 20 minutes because she had forgotten what it felt like to not be in pain, and the absence of it was so profound it felt like a physical thing. About her mother, who had stayed for 2 weeks and who had made soup, the same soup they had eaten the night of the ER when Sophia was 7, which Linda had made without knowing it was the same soup, and which Sophia had not told her because some symmetries are better held privately. About her father, who had called every morning since the surgery, not emailed, called. At 8:15 before his first meeting, consistent as a tide. He's trying, Sophia said, in the way that people try when they've realized something late and are making up for it. It's a little intense sometimes. She smiled slightly. I told him last week that he didn't have to call every day. He said he wanted to. I said, okay. She paused. I've been thinking about what I want to do, she said. With the next part, I was in environmental consulting because it seemed like the right kind of work, meaningful, necessary, and it is. But I keep thinking about what you did, about what it meant that one person read the file carefully enough to find the thing everyone else had walked past. She looked at Claire. I want to do something with that. I don't know what the shape of it is yet, but I've been talking to a patient advocacy organization in DC. They work on healthcare access, on making sure that patients who don't have a vice admiral for a father have the same shot at being heard that I eventually had. She paused. It feels like the right direction. Claire looked at her for a moment. Your father told the board of directors that the reason the system failed you was that you didn't have institutional power, she said. He was right, but he also said that what you needed was someone paying attention. He was right about that too. She paused. Both of those things have to change, the power and the attention. You changing one and me changing the other. She stopped. Sophia finished the sentence. Is the same work from different directions, she said. Yes, Claire said. They sat with that for a moment. Then Sophia reached into her bag and took out a small envelope and set it on the table between them. Claire looked at it. What is this? Claire said. Open it, Sophia said. Claire opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, handwritten, 3 paragraphs. She read it. She read it again. It was a letter of support, co-signed by Sophia Winters and Vice Admiral Marcus Winters, addressed to the United States Senate Subcommittee on Health, recommending the formal adoption of the Hargrove Nursing Clinical Insight Protocol as a standard of care requirement for all federally accredited medical facilities. It had been drafted with the help of the congressional staffer who had emailed Claire after the Callahan findings, and it cited the protocol by name, the Callahan case by name, and Claire Donovan by name. My father has a meeting with 2 senators next week, Sophia said. He's taking that letter with him. Claire held the paper in both hands and did not speak for a moment. 11 years. 11 years of standing near doors in consultation rooms. 11 years of cold coffee and legal pads and notices and margins that nobody with authority had asked her to write. 11 years of being present but not centered, necessary but uncredited, fluent in the language of what was wrong and unable to force anyone to listen. One cold night in a break room, 1 page 47, one phone call made before she knew whether it would matter. And now her name was in a letter going to the United States Senate. She thought about Robert Callahan, who had been 62 years old and who had loved birds and bad puns and who had deserved better. She thought about his daughter's email, 4 careful paragraphs cheering for her. She thought about all the nurses in all the hospitals in this country who were writing in margins right now, tonight, at this moment, in charts that might not be read until it was too late. She folded the letter back carefully and put it in the envelope and held it. You're going to keep fighting, Sophia said. It was not a question. Yes, Claire said. Even when it gets harder, Sophia said. Because it will. I know, Claire said. It was already hard. What made you keep going? Sophia asked. Before any of this, before the protocol, before the conference, before anyone was listening. What kept you going then? Claire thought about it. She thought about the woman with Parkinson's and the card at Christmas. She thought about page 47 in the break room and the cold coffee. She thought about every patient she had ever sat with at 2 in the morning when the floor was quiet and the family had gone home and the only person left in the room was her. She thought about what it meant to be the person who stays. The patience, Claire said, simply, completely. That's all, every single time, the patience. Sophia looked at her for a long moment with the full, clear eyes of a woman who has been to the edge of being dismissed entirely and has come back from it and knows, in her body, what it cost and what it was worth. "Thank you," Sophia said, "for reading the file, for making the call, for not going home." Claire looked at her steadily. "Thank you," Claire said, "for not stopping." They sat together in the lobby of Hargrove Medical Center on a Tuesday afternoon in June. A nurse and the patient who had changed everything. While the building moved around them, doctors and orderlies and families and folders, and all the invisible machinery of care, and neither of them needed to say anything more, because some things are complete in the saying of them, and this one was. Sophia Winters had been dismissed by 312 doctors, silenced by the most powerful physician in the building, and left with a fracture in her skull for 17 years. Claire Donovan had stayed late, read page 47, and made one phone call before she knew if it would matter. And because of that, one woman got her life back. One man's death was not forgotten, and the quiet, invisible work of a nurse became the foundation of something that was going to change the way American medicine listened. Some revolutions begin with a declaration, some begin with a battle, and some begin with a cold cup of coffee and 47 pages and one person who refuses to go home until they have done what needed to be done. This one began with Claire Donovan, and it was only getting started.